Well, good afternoon. This is Houndog Steve wishing you a very pleasant afternoon. And, well, here we are in southwestern Texas, and it gets pretty warm in the afternoon, so I'm just staying in the shade here, but I needed to do a catch-up video. I actually needed to take a few days off from all of this just because of what happened at the ostrich farm. Wow, what an absolute shock that was. I really didn't think they would go through with it. I thought they would put this off, kick it down the road a little bit further, but well, sad to say, basically the deed is done now, and I've just been hearing this morning that the bins that were taken off the farm after the mass killing, they took them off to Surrey in BC, and they've been in those bins for 4 days, and they're stinking to high heaven. And of course there was no care or concern about any leakage going down the highway. No one on the facility, which strangely enough is basically a gas depot, a gas shipping company, and yet all these bins are being stored there, and yet no one's wearing a hazmat suit or anything like that. It is just an absolute travesty. And you know, it's amazing. Actually, there's another incident that's occurred just recently. Critteraid is a pet sanctuary in BC, and it had a cull order from the CFIA, and because there's some chickens died from the avian influenza, and they had to cull the ducks along with them. But they certainly seem to be given much kinder treatment than the folk at the ostrich farm was. But it was interesting that the woman who owned or ran Critteraid said that she was going to do everything that she could to protect her animals from getting avian flu, and you know, that is just not possible. Avian flu is carried by the wild bird population, and so it is continually being circulated around and around and around, and because we don't see these individual birds that are in the wild, we have no idea of those that succumbed to avian flu. Or we know that the ones that are flying around either A, haven't got it yet, or B, have natural immunity now because they survived the whole process. And that is how you protect your livestock from this kind of stuff. You bury the dead in lime so that the body just dissolves, it gets rid of all the pathogens, and yeah, you allow those animals that are going to die and dispose of them, and the ones that remain you assume have now natural immunity, and they will start passing that natural immunity on to their offspring. So this is how you protect your flocks and make them stronger, and your herds, and make them stronger for any future pathogen that might come down the line. You know, the way we're going is going to do exactly the opposite. We're going to weaken all of our strains until they can't stand any kind of a blow from anything that comes along. So, you know, this is really, it's not even against science, it's against common sense. And so it is incredibly frustrating to watch all of this happen, and to not see anybody except for people who are not being listened to stand up and point this out and say, like, you know, what are you thinking about here? Like, what kind of direction are you taking this world in, where we have to be fully dependent on vaccines, supposedly, but they're not even safe or effective either. You know, the flu vaccine success rate is something like as low as 17, and I think the highest they ever had was about 30% effectiveness. Well, that's not what I call effective. You know, you might for that you might as well not bother, and especially if there's a chance of side effects or a reaction or something like that. Yeah, why would you even bother? So, you know, we're down in Crazy Street right now. All of the politicians are pretending that this is not going on. I'm stunned at the Supreme Court. Well, a majority of women hold seats on the Supreme Court, and there was not any kind of empathy from any of them. Wow. And like I say, you know, it's not that we're not just following the science, we're directly contradicting it. Like I say, all of the RCMP were running around like slaves and lackeys to the CFIA, with the fields handling the hay, being around the carcasses, being in the kill zone. You know, there was no care or concern for their health or protection or anything to support that this was as dangerous a pathogen as they made it out to be. So, you know, I mean, I think they left most Canadians who saw this believing that it was just absolutely a charade from beginning to end, and certainly uncalled for. And given the lack of political involvement, I would say that there is something bigger going on here than we're being led to believe, that there is some kind of other involvement. So I suspect that the CFIA will just continue. They'll just chalk this up as another success story in their history of saving humanity once again, and they'll move on to the next disaster, because that is what this agency is basically a wrecking crew. And, you know, where may all of this lead? You know, when people can walk onto your property, your private property, seize your animals, get the police to do their dirty work and protect them from anything that you might want to do all the things that they're telling you not to do, like a no-fly zone and that kind of stuff. I mean, it's just absolutely stunning. You want to lay charges against the CFIA and the RCMP ignore that notice? I mean, come on, it's bad enough that there are all kinds of miscreants, murderers, child traffickers, drug traffickers, and God knows what else going on in BC, which has been brought to our attention south of the border. And here you have like 30 RCMP officers staying in hotels overnight in some small area of BC, basically sitting around doing nothing or acting like stable hands. I mean, you know, surely there are other priorities. But yes, if you thought that saying this was going to go into your pets was far-fetched, well, like I say, they're already in this pet sanctuary, and like I say, luckily they did allow the cats and dogs to be untouched. I don't know whether they were tested, but like I say, it certainly was handled a lot more differently, and maybe it was the fact that they'd just been through this disgusting episode at the Universal Ostrich Farm. And it was interesting to note that the police actually had a chaplain there, so this obviously has jarred these young officers more than we can imagine. If you need a chaplain who in turn, remarkably enough, is going to use God's words to justify and to pacify these young men and to help them get through this traumatic situation, it basically is a whole other video in and of itself. But if you wonder where this is going to lead to, and I don't know how long this is going to be, I'm just going to read segments of a document that was sent to me by a friend of mine, and it is basically a study, a cost-benefit analysis in using MAID to basically cull society. And you'll see, you know, it's all of these people like with retirees and people with mental issues and indigenous people who have already tried to commit suicide. It's not just people who are terminally ill or who are in terrible pain. And yeah, this study has actually done a cost-benefit analysis. And anyway, I'm just going to read some segments of that, and it'll give you some idea of what the government might be considering for yours and my future. And of course it is of concern to me because I am that average age of 72. So, you know, they're figuring 9.5 years on this planet, and I'm going to cost them more than I'm going to contribute to the system. And of course they seem to have forgotten all the contributions that I made when I was a younger man. And of course, luckily, I still don't need the healthcare system. I'm still in actually very good health. But You know, I made all those contributions when I was younger, when my family was healthy. And we placed really no demands on the healthcare system because we were supporting the people who were ahead of us, who did need the healthcare system. And I accepted that as part of the deal, that we're all going to contribute, and the people behind me are going to keep contributing. And of course, the reason the government is looking at these kind of things, well, okay, I'll tell you what. First, let's go and I just read you a few little paragraphs from this document to give you an idea, and I'm going to link the document below so you can read the whole thing yourself. I would print it off and I would show it to your friends, especially if you are in my age bracket. Okie dokie, here we go. Okay, so this will just give you an idea of the kind of job that the CFIA does when it culls out animals. A press release by the Vancouver Humane Society on January 19, 2005 cited testimony before the committee of chickens beaten to death and thousands of ducks suffering repeated gassing. The press release summarised testimony by farmers concerning the Canadian Food Inspection Agency's use of faulty and inappropriate culling methods include a failed attempt to kill a barn full of chickens with CO2 gas, which left 60% of the birds alive. The surviving birds were then clobbered with sticks. Up to 100,000 ducks suffering a slow death by being gassed with CO2 3 or 4 times before they died. CFIA officials shooting peacocks with shotguns, leaving some wounded. Specialty pigeons being destroyed, despite the fact that they cannot transmit avian flu. Lethal injections failing to kill an emu on the first attempt and being repeated. And there was actually reports of cleanup shooting at the Universal Ostrich Farm, so this implies that not all of the ostriches were dead because they did the culling at night time. Okay, so this is from the Sage Institute. It was a study of a government study, first published February 28th, 2025. Government economics of expanding Canada's medical assistance in dying to vulnerable populations and ethical implications of allowing the state to control death. Abstract. This study explores the potential economic savings from expanding medical assistance in dying, MAID, in Canada, where it is currently a leading cause of death, to include vulnerable groups that cost the government more than they contribute in taxes. Thank you very much. These groups include individuals with severe mental health issues, the homeless, drug users, retired elderly, and indigenous communities, both voluntary and non-voluntary. And here we go, indigenous communities. Don't we recognize that we are on indigenous land, unceded land? We're trying to basically suck and blow at the same time. Unbelievable. Both voluntary and non-voluntary scenarios were analyzed, projecting total savings of up to 1.273 trillion by 2047, with an estimated 2.6 million deaths in the voluntary scenario, mostly among mentally ill and elderly populations. This cost-saving measure raises significant ethical concerns. Financially incentivizing MAID could shift healthcare priorities away from providing necessary support, potentially devaluing vulnerable lives, and fostering a troubling reliance on assisted death as an economic solution. The findings highlight a need for ethical scrutiny of MAID policy expansion. Introduction. The Canadian government legalised euthanasia or medical assistance in dying for eligible citizens in 2016. This policy change has resulted in a marked increase in the country's mortality rate, with MAID now constituting the 5th leading cause of death in Canada. MAID was predominantly first used for patients with terminal illnesses experiencing intolerable suffering. In the last 2 years, however, this has been expanded to those who are not terminally ill, non-foreseeable deaths, at an accelerating rate. Ongoing legislative proposals seek to broaden eligibility further to include Canadians with severe mental health conditions. For instance, Bill C-14 states that individuals with mental illness or physical disabilities will not be excluded from MAID. Canadians seeking MAID must voluntarily request it, be at least 18 years old, and possess the capacity to make informed healthcare decisions, Government Canada 2023. They must also provide informed consent and be eligible for publicly funded healthcare services in Canada. Additionally, the person must be experiencing physical or mental suffering deemed unbearable with no relief options considered acceptable. Proponents of extending MAID to mental illnesses argue that such conditions are as legitimate as physical illnesses in terms of suffering. In 2022, there were 1,241 MAID cases, accounting for 4.1% of all deaths in Canada. The cumulative total of MAID since the program's start has reached 44,958. A 31.2% rise in MAID cases was observed in 2022, which is around the 32.6% increase observed in the preceding year. Projections for MAID extended to mental illness suggest a significant increase, with cases surging to between 227,000 to 896,000 cases by 2047, according to conservative estimates, and on the high end up to the approximately 4.9 million by 2047, which would impact 12.3% of the population. By the way, all of these, like in the study, all of these Fraser Institute, so on and so forth, they're highlighted. You can go and check out the study yourself. So all of these things are already done for you. Now this, I found an interesting part of the study. Canada itself is in economic decline, which is stressing the medical system. This decline represents the second longest and third deepest drop in living standards during this period. Canada's weak economic growth has persisted for a decade, with per capita real GDP growth showing its smallest increase in nearly a century. Canada's Quality of Life Index ranking has deteriorated from 5th place in 2013 to 30th place in 2024. A rapid increase in immigrant population has exacerbated pressures on affordable housing, schools and hospitals. Housing affordability reached its lowest point in over 40 years and is linked to adverse effects on community health, crime rates, homelessness, children's well-being and economic growth. In 2022, 35% of all Canadians reported difficulty in meeting their financial needs over the past year, and 26% indicated they could not cover an unexpected expense of $500. A 2023 report suggests that more than 50% of Canadians were within $200 of being able to pay all of their bills. Discussion. MAID is increasingly viewed as a method to cut healthcare costs. Medically assisted deaths could save millions in healthcare spending. And it is clear from the results of the study that, as several advocates of expanding MAID have argued, if MAID is expanded to many marginalised populations within Canada, the government would save money. The result of this analysis show that savings would be on the order of billions of dollars per year. The savings become even more substantial if, get this, if killing of a Canadian citizen is not extracted from the medical process and is instead carried out by low-skilled government employees, or outsourcing is legalized. And you know what happens if that is outsourced? There will be organ selling. Yes, there will. Don't you doubt it. Other proposed approaches to administering MAID have also been explored, such as the single-serving death chamber in the form of a capsule designed to kill the occupant. To answer the question if automation with the capsule design or other devices would further reduce costs is left for future work. The entire line of thinking, however, has several ethical weaknesses. Firstly, framing MAID as a legitimate cost-saving measure devalues the inherent dignity of human life, leading to what some refer as a dangerous societal mindset where death is seen as a convenient and efficient solution to suffering rather than investing in better care. There have also been concerns raised about the slippery slope effect of MAID. Slippery slope? We don't have to worry about the slippery slope, mate. We are halfway down the slippery slope. Nielsen warns once we become a MAID society, MAID will lose the status as a last-ditch intervention for uncontrollable pain in imminently dying patients. Sick people will begin to see themselves as easily erasable and as excess human specimens. The conviction that it is a wonderful and divine thing to exist will be hollowed out by notions of a life that strives for societal convenience. Alternatives to killing, root cause elimination. What a novel idea! Oh my God! Instead of hiring people to kill marginalized groups, did you get that? Instead of hiring people to kill marginalized groups, Canada could focus its spending on expanding mental health services, addressing homelessness, improving elderly care, and treating Indigenous people exactly as they treat all other citizens. Similarly, homelessness prevention programs could be expanded, emphasizing on affordable housing projects and support services to address the root causes of homelessness. The Housing First national incentive provides immediate access to permanent housing for homeless individuals without preconditions such as mental health treatment. Reaching Home is another program aimed at reducing chronic homelessness by providing funding to community-based organizations for essential services like shelter, food, and health care. Scaling up such incentives could alleviate the conditions that lead to homelessness, addressing a core issue of instability that contributes to poor health outcomes and reducing the demand for MAID. Conclusions. The study clearly shows that expanding MAID to include vulnerable populations such as the mentally ill, homeless, elderly and Indigenous groups in Canada could lead to substantial government economic savings. For example, the cost savings associated with the mentally ill could reach up to $63 billion Canadian, while for the retired elderly population the savings could be $54 billion in the voluntary scenario, or as high as $1.2 trillion in a non-voluntary scenario. I wonder what that means. Using traditional methods of providing MAID in both cases. For the voluntary scenario, the total savings amount to $59 billion Canadian for traditional MAID and $65 billion using an outsourcing approach. Outsourcing, yes. Overall, the total savings across all groups in the non-voluntary MAID scenario are $1.238 trillion traditional and $1.273 trillion outsourcing. The total number of projected deaths in the voluntary MAID scenario results in 2,674,080 Canadian deaths, with a significant portion coming from the mentally ill and elderly groups. This creates a deeply troubling ethical dilemma. Providing such large economic incentives to have the government fund killing its own citizens could easily shift the focus of healthcare policy towards promoting MAID as a financially attractive option, rather than ensuring that vulnerable individuals receive the care and support they need. Such a system could foster a culture where ending life is seen as preferable to providing adequate care and support, which is dangerous for any society. The government could view MAID as a cost-savings mechanism, which could lead to policies that implicitly or explicitly encourage individuals to opt for assisted death. The expansion of MAID in this context risks devaluing human life, particularly among those who are most at risk of societal neglect. This is a dangerous and ethically fraught direction for any policy, as it implicitly encourages a license to kill mentality, which is highlighted by the fact that government savings increase substantially using non-medical contract killers. In conclusion, while the potential financial benefits of expanding MAID are considerable, the ethical costs are far too great. Thank you very much. Pity this is right at the very bottom of the document. It should be at the top of the document. Allowing vulnerable populations to opt for assisted death as a means of saving money for the state undermines the core values of medical ethics and morals. Policymakers must carefully consider these implications before moving forward with any further expansion of MAID. Hear, hear. Now, I hope you found that as stunning as I did, and what I was going to say is, it's amazing that the government is planning to do this, because it is now absolutely loaded down with debt. And that debt was created by the inflation of the monetary system And because debts can never be paid, I may do another video on this, because the interest is never created with the debt itself. It's always an outstanding amount, and to create more money to pay off the debt, it just increases the problem. It inflates the currency, and we're in the death throes of the end game of every single currency and monetary system that has been around since the dawn of time. The Romans went through this with inflating the dinero and so on and so forth. So they've actually created the problem knowingly. They've created the problem knowingly, because I'll tell you, if a grade 10 barber has figured this out, these guys with university degrees, they know what's going on. Okay, so they've created the problem, and now they're coming back to you to try and pay off the problem that they created. And they're going to do that by having a cost effectiveness study done on how much it costs to keep you and how much you're contributing to the system, and how much the government's going to save by offing all of these extremity groups, okay, that are just inconvenient to the government and a costly add-on. And this reminds me of a certain person who shall remain nameless, but lived in Germany between 1936 and 1945 and stirred up an awful lot of trouble. And this is what he did. He got rid of those people that he thought weren't important to his ideology, or just an expense, just a drain on the system. And so aiming towards perfection and removing imperfection and saving money at the same time, well, that just gives you an idea where this is all heading, where the government thinking is right now. And if you are not staggered by this, I'm staggered that it's so close. I'm not shocked at all. When you see things like the ostrich culling and the way that was dealt with, you know that this system is out of control now. And they're looking desperately for any ways to solve the problem that they created without taking any blame whatsoever. Okie dokie, well, if you've enjoyed this video, please like, comment, subscribe below, and yes, thank you for staying with me on this, and sorry I missed for a few days there. I am safe. I say I am in southwestern Texas, and it is a blazing hot day, although we did get a couple of cool ones. We got like a 3-degree centigrade about two days ago, and yes, that was kind of interesting coming down from Canada, but Canada has snow right now on the ground, so yes, I'm kind of pleased at that. But other than that, things are going well, and as I say, in the meantime, this is Houndog Steve signing off, wishing you a very pleasant afternoon, and we'll talk very, very shortly. See you now. Bye.